Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of our Uncut Gems podcast, where we host the most exciting and disruptive emerging crypto projects. Today, we have the pleasure to host a largely polarizing project, which is MegaETH. MegaETH, if you're not familiar, is currently pushing the performance envelope with an extreme throughput approach, and they also bring some exciting new ideas to this cycle. We are thrilled to have two of the founding members, Shuyao and Namik, joining us today. Both are driving forces behind MegaETH. Shuyao, also known as Brother Bing and Mega Bing, comes with a finance background from Harvard Business School. She then followed up as Global Head of Business Development at Consensus. And then Namik, who, for instance, worked at Hypersphere Ventures and also has a history at business development of Consensus. Overall, we feel like this team, the MegaETH team, delivers a fresh perspective on scaling efforts. And with that, welcome Shuyao and welcome Namik. It's a pleasure to have you on Uncut Gems.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, for sure. We kick things off with kind of your journey into crypto and also in particular founding MegaETH. Maybe both of you can give us a little bit more insights on how you ended up with MegaETH. Please go ahead.
Sure. I'll get it started. So my name is Shuyao, or Brother Bing. I got fascinated by crypto when I was living in Africa. So right out of college in the US, I moved to Nigeria. For those of you who understand, Nigeria had a lot of monetary issues, and I personally experienced a really bad currency depreciation. Mm-hmm. So think about one day you wake up and you just suddenly, lose 10% of your saving because the government had some sort of policy that negatively affected you. That's when I read an article on The Economist about Bitcoin. The fact that there is sovereign money that is permissionless, that's fundamentally peer-to-peer, that is governed by no one, was extremely appealing. Later on, I actually learned that a lot of the multinationals in Nigeria was actually using Bitcoin as a rail to transfer money from in Naira, which is the local currency, to Europe. So my belief in crypto, or more likely in Bitcoin, was established back then. Then in 2017, those of us who remember the ICO boom, I was quite fascinated by that because I thought we should just put everything on the blockchain. I was a consultant back then in the Middle East and in the financial sector. That moment, Consensus in 2017 was opening an office in Dubai. A friend of mine who I actually meditate quite a lot with told me, what are you doing in a big tech company? You should join the revolution. So I left my job and joined Consensus in the Middle East. I was in charge of a lot of the business development effort, especially with large banks and the local government, for a few months. Then the founder of Consensus was like, yo, you speak Chinese, why don't you just go do business development in Asia? So I moved from the Middle East, went to Asia, especially China and Hong Kong, and did some really fascinating projects. One of them I particularly remembered was we worked with the largest luxury retailer in Hong Kong and built a project that allowed people to track secondhand luxury products and make sure that whatever you sell, the money is actually donated to the right recipients. Those type of use cases were not applicable anymore, but to me, those are the dreams that everybody want to put on chain, right? Immutability, transparency, money goes everywhere. Then did a bunch of biz dev work in Asia, came back to the States, went to business school. Anyone who's considering going to business school, please reach out. I feel like if we're in crypto, then business school is not applicable or attractive time to spend your life, even though I went to, I think, one of the best ones. So I came back to the States, continued to work at Consensus for another few years. By the time I left early this year, I was in charge of our global business development, so including products that everybody love and hate at the same time, which is MetaMask, Infura, Linea. I also sunset a few products, so those of us who remember Quorum, We open sourced it. Some of you probably have used Truffle. We also open sourced it. So I've really seen the cycles of ups and downs and different tech stack. But something always remain itchy in my heart, which is we have not sorted the base layer. No matter how many blockchains we have, none of the blockchain is capable to host high compute and high intense applications, right? The one that with Uniswap, right? Like you don't need a high throughput blockchain. So then I met my co-founder Elon and Lei, and the design of MegaETH really makes sense to me. And a lot of people didn't know our core design was actually not that novel. In fact, Vitale wrote about the precise architecture in his 2021 blog post called Endgame. In that blog post, he said the most scalable and endgame blockchain is one that has relatively centralized block production, which is an execution environment, and very decentralized block validating network. And that's exactly what we're building. So I was like, yo, that's a no-brainer. I should just go and build MegaETH and make sure that we actually can onboard application that looks and feels like Web 2, but even better than Web 2, because now we have a peer-to-peer network and crypto-native primitives. So that is my journey.
A little bit about me. My name is Namik. I am Turkish Cypriot Azerbaijani. So similar to Shuyao, I grew up I had experiences which really helped understand the power of crypto. Azerbaijan faced like a 70-80% double devaluation back in 2015 when I was younger. Got into crypto around 2020, in part because of Shuyao telling me about the power of crypto. We were working on a project together before that. And yeah, started doing a lot of like DeFi, DAO, NFT stuff. Found it to be very fascinating, but infrastructure was still too centralized. So I joined the venture funded Hypersphere and started investing in infrastructure, primarily around the idea of a modular blockchain stack, but really intellectually fascinating. Did that for a bit over a year and then decided that I want to start learning a bit more about liquid markets. And I had experience trading liquids, so I joined a prop shop in New York where I was trading my own book. I ended up working for Shuyao at Consensus, doing strategy and business development. And yeah, when she told me about MegaETH, I was all ears and joined.
Nice. Hey, thanks both for these insights. Also very exciting and cool backgrounds, as many people kind of have in crypto. And obviously we share this kind of excitement when it comes to these new payment rails and settlement rails that crypto now offers to many people that suffer from monetary debasement. And it's like, yeah, crazy to hear that you yourself also to some degree suffered from that very kind of weakness of fiat currencies, let's say. Maybe, Brother Bing, we start with something spicy. I quote a recent tweet from you where you kind of claimed MegaETH will expose those fake technical people. I guess you remember. Will also crush those semi-technical people who take pride in weaving technical jargons, and also inspire deeply technical people to think differently. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how does MegaETH do that? That would be nice.
Yeah, I'm so glad you called out this tweet because when I wrote it, I did not think it would be so controversial. Yeah. I thought everyone knows this. Like, honestly, there are so many people who talk as if they understand the technicality behind crypto, but in fact, they're using jargons. And by the way, sometimes I do that too, because I am just not technical, right? I am the business partner for MegaETH. So it was kind of like making fun of myself too. But I think internet took it very seriously because I think everyone had insecurity and I accidentally exposed them. So I'm sorry if I hurt you. But joke aside, right? For the last 6 months, when I try to explain what MegaETH is, I often get different reactions. For people who are not technical, they would say something like, oh yeah, you guys have like a beefy server, that's good, that's like a Solana. But that's not really the case, right? We do have a beefy server, but the key to our design is that we have a blockchain scaffolding, which is our very decentralized validating network, right? So if we're just building on a beefy server, then Hyperledger would solve it. And who remembers Hyperledger these days? No one. And then we talk to really smart people. They have this one idea, one design of what layer 1 and layer 2 is, which is, as decentralized as possible, or pretend that they are decentralized, but they're not. Like most of the layer 2s are not. So my idea was, let's not pretend to be decentralized when we're not. Let's really own the centralization narrative, but make sure that the blockchain primitives are still present. And that's what we say, like we want to inspire technical folks, is that we want to show them there is a new frontier in blockchain design that preserve the decentralization, but also actually using the server, the beefy server, the way that Web 2 uses. So that's why I tweeted it, and I was, I guess it's all good, right? Attention is fundamentally positive in our industry. I'm so glad you're calling it out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know how to leverage that front. And obviously, like your take very much resonates with me. I feel, and both Wolfgang and me are here for very honest discussions. I feel this is something that the entire industry lacks somewhat. Let's stop sugarcoating everything and just have a real talk. And with that, I guess we will dive into some of the high-level ideas of MegaETH.
Yes. I fully agree with you. Like, you often hear complaints that people are working too much on infrastructure and nobody's focused on applications. I also believe that work on infrastructure is needed, and there are some applications that will be uniquely enabled by solutions like MegaETH. So at least it's worth to explore that design space and try to provide this kind of real-time blockchain. So I would like to give you some time to discuss or present what is your vision, and maybe it's helpful if you also list some of the applications that would be really uniquely enabled by MegaETH once it's live on mainnet.
Sure. So what I'll start with is kind of explaining how we got here from a technological perspective, right? And then what we can empower with MegaETH. I think big picture, our team thinks that fundamentally achieving like Web 2 levels of performance is very, very, very difficult while maintaining consensus and decentralization as a layer 1, right? You can call it whatever you want. People have liked to call it the trilemma, this or that. The only new information which has entered the market, however, in the recent years was the security framework of Ethereum L2s, right? And the idea here is that by being a layer 2, by settling on Ethereum, you can effectively inherit in some ways the decentralization and security of Ethereum as a function of settling on this extremely decentralized base layer. So given this piece of information, our team went back to the drawing board and said, how can we create the most performant execution environment possible? And we found that given the security frameworks of layer 2s, we can effectively really deploy the strategy called node specialization and take it to the absolute extreme. There have been forms of node specialization or other execution environments in other layer 1s. But fundamentally, given the security framework of Ethereum and the layer 2 architecture of Ethereum, we can take it to a degree that's never been done before, to a natural maximum. So what we do is we basically say, hey, each task of the blockchain should have a different node software and hardware configuration, right? They're intrinsically different. So execution and sequencing should actually have very different node architecture and block validation. So what we do is we have one very, very, very performant sequencer that's able to stream blocks at lightning speeds, right? Real-time blockchain, 100,000 transactions per second, 1 millisecond latency. What we then do is we optimize the rest of the stack to be able to match this. If you don't optimize the rest of the stack, the bottleneck pops up somewhere else. So what we've done is we've built like a prover network where each prover node is a subset of the sequencer's transactions, an architecture similar to stateless validation. We've done this, we've done that, across the entire board. Why is this really exciting? Because we believe that fundamentally speaking, latency opens the newest design space for applications that can leverage the power of crypto without bringing in the performance degradation associated with Web3. I think something that I'm particularly excited about, yes, DeFi is very cool. Happy to talk about it. I know there's a lot of controversy on the timeline about the role of DeFi. We have lots of cool DeFi things. But what I'm really excited about is also net new applications which can be built. I'm talking about fully on-chain games with no loss-log degradation. You can move a character around in real time and be able to stream that information off the blockchain. I'm talking about autonomous world engines. I'm talking about decentralized VPN networks. These are all things that have either never been tried before or can now be tried in an environment where you no longer have those performance bottlenecks. I'm excited to see consumer social really blow up and get massive in a way that enables a new design space for our data, right? Traditionally speaking, the only data which is on-chain is data that's valuable. But if you can get mass amounts of data, which on its own is not valuable, but in aggregate has intrinsic value, this is net new applications of a net new design space. So we're very excited for effectively from like helping usher a new generation of applications on-chain. And I think the ramifications are amazing for both DeFi as well as non-DeFi.
Yeah, excited to see on-chain games. You know, I like gaming, and it's always a struggle for me to imagine like real-time Web3 gaming, like really on-chain. So yeah, I definitely want to see that and try when it's live. Yeah. So you talked about 1 millisecond latency, right? But at the end of the day, there will always be like a ping, like you have to reach the sequencer. So when we talk about games in real time, we mean also refresh rate, tick rate, like that's the delay. It's more like the streaming, 1 millisecond.
Yeah, so we will have a high tick rate. But what I think is important to note here is like, what's the additional latency associated with a blockchain? Yes, there's going to be latency around the world, right? We can't break the laws of physics. But when you look at the fact that when you think of like latency traditionally on blockchains, and the reason why it's a second, multiple seconds, that's as a function of consensus.
Yep.
For us, it's truly just constrained by this, geolocation, which means very little additional latency because we're using the blockchain.
Okay.
You know, I would add something. I think your question was really good. What's our vision? And we have a vision, which is we're building the real-time blockchain, and we want to have real-time apps. But often I found out we go back to analogy with the internet era. Like when internet started, no one thought YouTube would be there. Right? No one really thought TikTok would be there. I think about MegaETH as, we're building this so robust and so fundamentally different block space, and there will be applications that we don't even know would exist. Like every day, us as a team, we will think like, oh wow, there's this like UGC generated content. What if we put it on MegaETH and there is a new economic primitive we can unlock? We're working with one of a team in Asia, and they are archaeologists. They love to explore using drone to take photo and 3D models of sites that are forgotten. And to us, it's like, what are we building? We're actually teaching people a new habit, which is, you go somewhere, you love the scene, and rather than just taking pictures and posting on Instagram, why don't you just take some picture and we make a 3D model and you tell a story of it? So I think the design space is huge. Our investor, we're at the Dragonfly office, they called us the iPhone moment for crypto. I think we just don't know what we can unlock once we have this infrastructure.
Nice.
Hey,
iPhone moment of crypto. That's huge. Yeah.
High five. Yeah. Hey, that's it's really an exciting outlook. Yeah. And I also like the notion from you guys, basically, when it comes to distributed systems, that they can only be as strong as the weakest link, kind of, when it comes to performance and throughput. And therefore, it's really kind of obvious that you have to kind of optimize all of these different pillars as much as possible within the tech stack. And with that, I kind of would like to highlight this, like one of your centerpieces when it comes to presentations, which kind of centers around this chubby bunny. Maybe you could outline a little bit or highlight very high level on the different pillars within that tech stack and also with the different axes when it comes to decentralization and basically having very lean bunnies when we think about provers, but having a very chubby bunny when we think about the sequencer level. Maybe you could give us some insights on the different components that you use within the tech stack.
Sure. I remember we used this presentation from Modular Summit in Brussels. So that might be what you're referring to. I think it's fun. Technically, in our opinion, right, the bunny analogy is supposed to represent a node, right? And traditional blockchain architectures are homogeneous, meaning one node does every single task, right? So you now need to figure out what is your bunny going to look like, right? If you want to have a blockchain which is great for validation, right, meaning that you can get as many people to be a part of the network as possible, to make it as decentralized as possible, you naturally need a very skinny bunny, because the bunny needs to be, very lightweight. The bunny needs to be able to be agile. Anyone needs to be able to be this bunny.
Yeah.
But it's not great for, other things like performance, right? So what ends up happening here is that, you end up having quite a, it's a fundamental mismatch, right? What you want for sequencing execution is like very, very chubby bunny, right? That's going to be a very beefy node, right? So you can do these optimizations, you can push it to the limit of hardware. And that is kind of what Ethereum is, right? Ethereum is a very skinny bunny. And that was really awesome. Like, we love Ethereum, and I think Ethereum is hyper-indexed on being the most decentralized block space in the world, being the most decentralized layer one in the world, settlement layer of the world, right? I think that's very powerful. But clearly there are people who need more performant execution as well. So you saw the rise of like the chubby bunny, and that's going to be Solana, right? And why is this bunny chubby? Because you actually want to have really, really, really performant, nodes and really beefy nodes for that task, which is sequencing, which is execution. But the chubby bunny is not great for validation, right? So it's kind of unfortunate. So what MegaETH does is we say, as I think I mentioned before, what if we can have one node, what if we could have a specialized node architecture for each task? So that means, why don't we have a specific bunny for each task, right? And that way we can optimize that bunny and optimize that node to do that task in the best way that's possible for what that task really needs. So that's what node specialization is. We specialize each of the nodes.
Okay, now maybe before moving on, talking more in detail about the different nodes, we can talk more about sequencers, full nodes, and the prover network. I also wanted to clarify, maybe more at a higher level, the architecture of the network, because you mentioned, for instance, that layer 2s and maybe more specifically rollups can inherit security and decentralization of Ethereum. But at the same time, I would like to ask, is it wrong to refer to MegaETH as a rollup? Are you planning to have like a validating bridge to Ethereum? What are you using Ethereum for instance? All these kind of questions. What is used as settlement? What for data availability? You use EigenDA for DA, right? And how is MegaETH positioned in the modular stack? And if you would agree on referring to MegaETH as a rollup or an optimium, maybe, if there is a validating bridge with a fraud-proof system, or at least that's the plan. Yeah, if you can expand on that, on the different layers.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I could have given you a simple answer, which is, yes, we are a rollup. We probably started on Ethereum. In fact, we are probably the only rollup that cannot survive without Ethereum, right? We have a centralized sequencer. We need an extremely robust and decentralized settlement layer. We chose to use EigenDA because we are just so high performance, and we want to provide our applications and builders really cheap transactions. EigenLayer is the one that suffices those requirements, and we believe that Eigen is also extremely Ethereum aligned. We work them on multiple fronts. So the short answer is we are a rollup. We kind of shy away. The complicated answer is we shy away from these terminologies, optimum, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
All know that, ZK is the future, but ZK is not MegaETH's stronghold. We are experts in performance, and we're hoping that other people in the ecosystem will nail the ZK game so we can use ZK as consensus. But that's not what we're aiming for. We want to be a real-time blockchain that's settled on Ethereum, period. And the reason we never say, we're a real-time rollup is because that we think rollable layer 2 will be such a common design in the future that the line between layer 1 layer 2 will be extremely blurry. In fact, we believe that people will remember blockchain because of the applications on certain chain rather than the architecture. So as a team, we don't put a lot of effort on naming ourselves. In fact, we didn't name full node, right, according to some. And it's just not important to us at the moment.
Okay, fair take. I would like to spend a little bit more time on the sequencer or our chubby bunny. I think it's important to talk about it, to address it briefly for the audience, just to provide some context. You guys really know well that the centralized or a centralized sequencer remains one of the most controversial topics surrounding rollups. We also know, even for well-established ecosystems such as Optimism or Arbitrum, there's a lot of discussion centering around this centralized sequencer and how to decentralize it. And kind of MegaETH comes intentionally with this chubby bunny, or kind of that notion of a centralized sequencer. And as we know, it introduces kind of some significant risks that are discussed that maybe undermine the foundational principles of such distributed systems, such as, let's talk censorship, single point of failure, interoperability, or MEV. Maybe please provide some context on your mental model when it comes to sequencing, and why you are not concerned at all about these kind of, let's say, risks.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of really powerful things to go over, right? Mm-hmm. The past few years of the Ethereum roadmap has been on figuring out the way to scale leveraging layer 2s, right? So a lot of that work has been on fraud proofs and in the ZK proofs in that entire field. And for our opinion is that if we are going to try and just replicate a layer 1 architecture by decentralizing the sequencer, we're giving up on something really powerful, which is performance. The second you bring consensus into block production, things get a bit slower, right? That's just the nature of how it works. So on our end, we ask ourselves, well, it's actually really interesting. There's a lot of really powerful guarantees that we're comfortable with. These are guarantees which the Ethereum community has been comfortable with, right? What are they? Well, firstly, you have the ability to use the exit hatch to take your ETH from the L2 to the L1. That means even if the sequencer is being malicious, your ETH is safe. I think people don't talk about just how powerful that is, of both a technical guarantee as well as a social consensus guarantee. In both ways. Happy to talk about both. The second thing is all of the work that's been done of the proof to effectively, with fraud proofs, to verify that the sequencer is in order, right? Again, pushing deeply with the, effectively this threat of the escape hatch to bring all the assets back down, right? All the ETH. And I think thirdly is the power of, effectively a rotational sequencer architecture, right? We speak about how we love centralized sequencers. We do. But it doesn't mean only one person should run the sequencer. What we're against is multiple sequences running at the same time and you having to have consensus amongst those. So our plan is a rotational sequencer architecture, allowing us to maintain this level of performance while decentralizing the operator of the sequencer.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Thanks for the insights.
Yeah, that works. And okay, then, if we move on the axis of the different nodes and node specialization, after the sequencers, I would like to talk more about full nodes, or I've read being mentioned also as optimistic full nodes more recently.
Or lazy.
For me, you can call them full nodes. There is no rule on what a full node is. Different projects can use this term in different ways. What I'm more interested in is what the full nodes do, like what is the function of the full nodes in MegaETH. And to my understanding, the main point, like why would anyone run a full node, is what you want is to be updated with what is the current state of MegaETH. That's the function of the full node. So if you're running an application, if you're providing, a service based on MegaETH, and you need to know the current state of MegaETH, you need to run a full node. And what is interesting is that hardware requirements are definitely not as high as the ones of the sequencer, actually maybe same order of magnitude as Ethereum full nodes, what they call full nodes.
Right.
And why? Because you don't need to re-execute all the transactions. So is that right, or did I miss something in what the full nodes are and do in MegaETH?
I think you summarized really well, and we actually wrote it in our white paper. The way
Cool.
we define full node was you don't execute the copy, you just validate.
Yeah, I think there was a conversation on Twitter around like, well, what if you do want to rerun, right? What happens then? And we gave a bit general architecture. The answer is yes, you can do that, right? And depending on what kind of player you are within the MegaETH ecosystem, you might very well want to do that, right? And the cost of that will be much lower than that of running the sequencer. So we're internally estimating it to be the same cost as a traditional high-end laptop.
Yeah, for me, the main difference is that, in an integrated blockchain or like a blockchain without node specialization, or let's say Ethereum, if you run a full node and you re-execute all the transactions, you know that you don't need to rely on anything else or trust anyone else. So even in the worst conditions of other players colluding, you will never accept an invalid state transition. Well, here running a full node, you need to rely on a prover network, which is maximally decentralized, gives you good guarantees that things actually work. They will detect anything going wrong with the sequencer. But still, there are other players. There is an external DA, so that's the difference, I would say. But for me, the design makes a lot of sense. So full nodes in MegaETH are for sure very important and useful, and you can reduce the hardware requirements thanks to the prover network. So I would move then on the prover network and discuss a bit more in depth about how it works. And what is counterintuitive and maybe striking even is that you are reducing the hardware requirements of full nodes because you don't execute transactions and you rely on the prover network. But then the nodes of the prover network have even lower hardware requirements than the full nodes. So that's amazing because one would expect, okay, maybe the provers are taking all the work of re-executing the transaction and validating. So I wanted to ask you, how do you achieve this? How come the provers are so light?
Sure. So effectively, I think you made a really good point, which is, wow, like these prover nodes are so light, like this is awesome.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to talk about when it comes to our prover network architecture, ranging from the fact that we're optimistic now, how we're going to lean towards ZK in the future, what we want to see X, Y, Z, right? But starting off with like the fundamental here. Node specialization would be like the fact that we're able to specialize the nodes means that we make a really beefy sequencer, right? So what would be horrible is if we ended up forcing, all these prover nodes to have to be able to match that sequencer one-to-one. Because that means you now need to have very, very, very beefy nodes, right, on the prover too. And then what are you doing? So what we do is effectively we say, hey, all of these nodes only really have to do a subset each of the sequencer's transactions, right? And they can all coordinate with each other to make sure that in them today, while no node is as beefy, let's say, as the sequencer, right? You're able to cover the pure volume and the amount of data that is being streamed from the sequencer. So it's a architecture similar to stateless validation, where you basically have each prover node doing a subset of the sequencer's transactions.
Amazing. And regarding maybe the trade-offs between optimistic proofs and ZK proofs, do you see a future in which it can be lightweight enough or efficient enough to have ZK proofs in your prover network? And what is unlocked then? Why would you do this switch?
Definitely. So I think the answer is yeah, for sure, all right? MegaETH, we're focused on performance. Our unlock is on making this the most performed execution environment imaginable. But in that regard, we are still quite modular, which is a word that people like to use. Meaning that we can easily move to a ZK prover network architecture at a moment's notice. Why are we not doing it right now? Solely because of performance, right? And we're hoping that down the road in a couple of years, maybe in 2-3 years time from now, maybe earlier, we'll be able to get to a point where they're both lightweight enough. I mean, they're basically lightweight enough and fast and cheap enough to be able to match the amount of compute and activity and data that MegaETH plans on facilitating? So the answer is definitely yes. When they're ready, we're ready.
Yeah, that makes sense from my point of view, because especially like currently sitting out a little bit, since there's like so much development happening on that front, makes sense. You might basically benefit a couple months down the road from like substantially better proving solutions, for instance. So you also know there's this ongoing debate about the Rollup-Centric roadmap, whether rollups and scaling solutions on top of Ethereum are parasitic or not. And just what's your take on that? Are they parasitic? Are they not? And if so, why or why not?
Yeah, so I think our take is we believe in the rollup-centric world, which is why we are building a rollup. And we also believe that a rollup-centric world is the only way to scale a blockchain. As many people know, layer one can never be scalable because of an issue called the stragglers problem. Every layer one node has to execute all the transactions, doing all the job at the same time. It's just not efficient. In that way, you have to rely on the rollup to actually offload the transaction and provide security. So rollup is definitely here to stay. Now, the question of whether rollup are parasitic to ETH, I think the question is whether it's hurting ETH as a chain or whether it's hurting ETH as an asset. These are two very different questions. We think it's very good for the chain. It's fundamentally onboarding more people to the crypto world. In terms of the asset, I think we haven't figured out a way to translate the economic activity of layer two to layer one yet. So for example, people would always say, oh, look at Solana, the market cap, all the activities. But if you look at all the layer two combined, it's just to the rooftop, right? But people do not have that mindset yet. So from our view, we'd love to contribute to how to change this economic model down the road. But our focus right now is to build our technology that actually contributes to Ethereum.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a tiny bit here. We would really, truly respect like a lot of the innovations happening on a layer one landscape, right? Like Solana is awesome, and so is Aptos, right? So, but at the same time, right? Like for us, what we're really indexed on is latency. We're really interested in latency and bringing like Web 2 levels of performance and those kinds of applications on chain. And fundamentally, our team just doesn't think that that use case can be solved on chain, on L1. So, and on the L2 landscape, right, this question of parasiticness, I think it also has to play a role to play of like, how reliant are you truly on how reliant are you truly on ETH? For us, it's extremely reliant, right? We cannot specialize nodes to the extent that we do if we do not settle on Ethereum. But I can see, and I almost will predict that like in a couple of years, you may see other layer twos which are not as reliant on Ethereum, not actually need to be on Ethereum, right? And they might become their own layer ones, especially if they decide to, decentralize the sequencer. And before you know it, right, it's like literally an L1 on an L1, right? Yeah. So when we ask why ETH, our answer is always it's the tech. The decision to be the most decentralized layer one is the reason we're on Ethereum. Do we benefit from liquidity and users? Sure. I think that this conversation of like parasiticness comes from the fact of like, what are you really leveraging from ETH? Is it its users and liquidity, or is it its decentralization and security?
In that case, it's somewhat both. And from your response, I also derived that MegaETH is somewhat aligned, right? To use that buzzword as well. One trade-off that comes with the Rollup-Centric roadmap, as you know, is it's an ongoing pain point, and it gets more severe the more basically activity migrates towards rollups, and it's fragmentation. Is that something that MegaETH will address to some degree, and if so, how? Like, do you have that on your radar, or might MegaETH just scale the entire globe?
Yeah, we're just gonna scale and achieve world domination. We always think about it, right? Like, but the word fragmentation again is something that semi-technical people use without really knowing what it is. So to our perspective, solving fragmentation without actually solving the base layer is not addressing the core problem. right? If your layer 2 actually are not performing, no matter how much effort you're building an intent protocol, like the user experience just isn't there. Our belief, on the other hand, is if we build a real-time blockchain, we really solve the capacity issue. We can actually have application that co-locate on our chain without the noisy neighbor issue. We actually believe in a single state machine, the way almost similar to what Solana does, right? If your chain is really performance, you naturally do not have fragmentation. So we think that we're addressing fragmentation from a very different approach, but fundamentally will benefit user. Rather than building a bridge layer, an intent layer, but you're not incentivizing new application, you're still confusing people because liquidity still has to go somewhere. And we are hoping that once we build out this technology, all the future rollup would look like a MegaETH. Because you genuinely benefit from such a powerful, scalable blockchain.
Yeah, for sure, I agree. And yeah, bear with me if I throw more semi-technical buzzwords at you.
We love semi-technical buzzwords.
That's why we like, we're talking to each other without hurdles.
So if you go back to the endgame blog post, you are exploring the path of one giant rollup. But actually, there can be more horizontally scaling, more MegaETH instances.
I think
That's really cool.
Everyone's been focusing on horizontal scaling, right? Yeah. And yeah, sure, if you have like 1 million rollups, each able to do like 5 TPS, congrats, right? You have like 5 million TPS blocks worth of block space. But the issue is you're not enabling any net new applications, right? Because the capability of each execution environment is still fundamentally limited. The hope is, for us at least, is like, hey, like let's max out what execution and performance can look like on a single state machine before we decide to create 1 billion more. Because those are net new use cases that aren't really unlocked with horizontal scaling.
Right. Okay, this is all great, exciting. I would like to finish this part on crypto economics, going back to the prover network, as I feel it's very important. It's a huge innovation, or anyway something different. About the prover network, if I understood well when we talked about it, basically you are splitting the work, and if you have many nodes in this big decentralized prover network, then they need to do less work because it's split. But this also means that you need many nodes. So my question is, are there incentives for nodes joining the prover network? Or, are you planning to reward these nodes? And also, if this number of nodes fluctuates, does it mean that suddenly also the requirements for the nodes, for the prover nodes, is changing because suddenly fewer nodes means more work? Like, how do you address this?
Answer soon.
Nice.
But we are keeping it closer to chest.
Awesome. No, I'm actually excited to learn more about it. And about the sequencer, are you also planning to have some form of slashing or something? Because, let's say the provers detect a fault or fraud. What happens next? Is there a form of collateral or slashing implemented or going to be implemented eventually?
Yeah, there's the economic security traditionally associated all of these layer 2 architectures, right? We'll be building additional mechanisms given the fact that we have this really, really performant sequencer and we have a rotational sequencer architecture.
Okay. I also want to give you the opportunity to discuss about other big technical upgrades or enablers. People might look at MegaETH and say, okay, they just pump up the hardware requirements of the sequencer and that's it. But actually, there is much more. So it's not just about asking the sequencer to have 4 terabytes of RAM and have all the state of memory rather than SSD, but there is more, just-in-time compilation, more efficient state tree, an optimized peer-to-peer layer. So I want to ask you, are all these technical enablers expected to be live on mainnet at launch, or is it something that is coming on a phased approach, or which one are expected already at launch? Like, what should we be hyped about?
So I think you touched on something really important here, right? Which is just jacking up the hardware requirements does not get you to the level of performance of MegaETH. What happens is when you have this increased design space, you can do the optimizations, like at least on the sequencer, right? In-memory compute, JIT compiling, and parallelization. But I think that it's important to know that these are the things that are able to kind of compound the power of jack up the hardware requirements. What you'll see is a phased approach throughout our testnet as well. So we're going to basically have our testnet go live in a couple of months. And as you're already engaging with the testnet, you'll be able to see the power of these optimizations going out until including after mainnet too. So you'll be continuously seeing the power of optimizations to creating more performance.
Nice.
I think the other thing I would like to add is, a really good piece of software requires really good thinking all around. Since we are a heterogeneous network, not only did we upgrade our sequencer by rewriting a lot of the state tree, etc., we are also contributing to how optimism node would look like. We're working extremely closely with Eigen to make sure that there's enough throughput and the price remains to be low. So I found our team, I'm obviously biased, but I found MegaETH as a project to be just intellectually challenging. Once you open up the design space, there's a lot of the other corners you can twist and do improvement. And at the end, you have a high performance system and software that no one can actually compete with, right? So that's where I think our edge is. We think very holistically.
Nice. I mean, with your approach, you get a whole new perspective. And as you outlined, kind of a blank canvas when it comes to design space. It's cool that to see you guys explore what is possible on that front. And as we inch closer to the end of our discussion, I think it's time to highlight a little bit, what's the current stage of development exactly? What's next on the horizon? Are there any updates, strategic partnerships that you can disclose, or also who's currently already building within the ecosystem, use cases that are enabled by MegaETH that you outlined before? Which of these are about to materialize? Maybe some insights for the audience would be cool.
Yeah, sure. We are launching our testnet in October, mainnet Q1 next year. In this, in terms of ecosystem, we have a flagship builders program called Mega Mafia. It's very easy for you to identify those builders. They have hats, are very sought after merch. And this program, for anyone who's listening and really want to build something novel, please come get in touch with us. We want to work with founders even before they have an idea, but the goal is to really push the boundary of what can be built fully on chain. Let's really explore this design space with real-time applications. I think some of the application Namik mentioned, right? We're very much bullish on fully on-chain games, consumers. Consumer actually benefits quite a lot with crypto because you have that transparency that you never had. Our DeFi primitives also have 0 to 1 moment because of the latency of our protocol. We are also actively exploring DePIN, and the reason is most DePIN actually requires real-time computation, and none of the other blockchain actually provides that to you. So we become a natural magnet for DePIN projects. And we want to work with Mega Mafia, which is actually quite a selected program, on making sure that all the applications that we're pushing out when we're launching mainnet are actually useful. You don't want people to come to our ecosystem with a bunch of noisy application that looks like another Uniswap. So that is our goal. We have this really powerful infrastructure. Let's actually build really powerful application. Let's destigmatize what crypto is all about. We love a good gamble, but in the meantime, we want people to love crypto application the way they love TikTok.
Yeah, makes sense. Also a very exciting outlook. And yeah, Wolfgang and me, I think we are both keen to finally see like on-chain gaming to become a
100%.
real thing.
Yes.
Like people talk about it since years and it's not really happening yet. But what we see though is kind of as there's more scalable infrastructure, we also see activity to pick up when it comes to daily active users and so forth. So this is happening already, and I think it's one of the pillars that gets full steam ahead as soon as we have something online as MegaETH. Is there anything vastly important that we missed discussing or that you like to mention?
One thing I want to mention is I think like the power of like third-party tooling too, right? Like no third-party tooling can actually match or be as performed as MegaETH. So we're also building a lot of that in-house or finding teams to build it. So for example, we have we're basically building like these price oracles, which are able to match our block times, which means real-time pricing, 1 millisecond price oracles. That's fascinating. That's amazing for DeFi. And we are looking for really talented teams to explore what does a wallet truly look like? What's the next generation of wallet look like? So it's like an open call for anyone listening. If you want to jam on some of these interesting like design spaces, which are massive bottlenecks for crypto adoption, please do reach out.
And lastly, we are all Bitcoiners at heart.
Yeah, we love Bitcoin.
We love
Yeah,
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin Suisse.
Yeah.
Nice.
You don't love Bitcoin? Yeah.
What are you doing here?
What are you doing here?
Hey, that was a great final take. Brother Bing and Namik, I think we had a super insightful discussion through the world of MegaETH. I think we also learned firsthand about your very innovative, maybe even disruptive approach to, let's say, enabling feature-rich real-time applications. On behalf of Bitcoin Suisse and our audience, thanks for sharing your time. With each day, we inch closer to infrastructure that really provides a kind of an on-chain shelter for every global resident. And yeah, we can't wait to see how MegaETH continues to evolve, to be honest.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Cool.
Thank you.
Last thing to our viewers, if you want to dive deeper into MegaETH, check out their website, social media channels. We will provide all the links in the show notes, and until next time.